Marcus Salvius Otho had always lived in the shadows of greater men. First Nero, then Galba, and finally destiny itself. Yet he was not born to be a shadow. His earliest years were marked by privilege, charm, and a talent for political theater. Rome, still drunk on the excesses of the Julio-Claudians, adored men like Otho, handsome, clever, generous with bribes, and quick to promise anything. But beneath the silk robes and the polished speeches lurked a dangerous hunger, a man desperate to carve his name into the marble of history. His friendship with Nero was once legendary. Together they drank through the nights, raced chariots at dawn, and squandered fortunes by midday. But when Nero stole Otho's wife, the infamous Poppaea Sabina, Otho's loyalty collapsed. Rome whispered that he never forgave the betrayal. If Nero had not exiled him to Lusitania, perhaps Otho's life would have remained a footnote. Instead, Lusitania taught him patience, dangerous patience, and the value of waiting until empires cracked. When Nero fell, Otho saw the first fracture. He approached Galba, an old general without charm but with armies behind him. Otho supported Galba's march on Rome, convinced that the aging man would reward loyalty with adoption. After all, Otho was perfectly positioned, rich, popular, and experienced. But Galba disappointed him. The emperor adopted Piso Licinianus, a quiet philosopher with no political base. Otho, humiliated and furious, realized that he had once again lived in another man's shadow. So he stepped into the light. The coup was swift. Otho bribed the Praetorian Guard, Rome's most dangerous force, and within hours the imperial palace shook. Galba, slow and trusting, marched through the forum believing the unrest would settle. What he found instead were the blades of his own guards. Otho watched as the old emperor was butchered, his body desecrated, his legacy stained with the blood that soaked the stones of Rome. When the purple cloak was offered to Otho, he accepted it with a trembling hand, not from fear, but from triumph. Everything he had waited for had finally arrived. The Senate hailed him as emperor, the crowds cheered, and the Praetorian Guard knelt before him. For the first time in his life, Otho was no longer a companion, a pawn, or a shadow. He was Caesar. Yet no throne in Rome came without ghosts. The same day Otho ascended, news arrived from the German frontier. Vitellius had already been proclaimed emperor by his own legions. 2 emperors, 1 empire, and Rome had no room for both. Otho had waited too long for power. Now he had to fight for it.
The first months of Otho's rule were a race against time. Vitellius, a jovial but gluttonous general, commanded fierce loyalty from the Rhine legions. These were hardened soldiers, forged by icy winters and barbarian wars. They laughed at the Praetorian Guard, calling them palace peacocks, and believed Rome deserved a soldier, not a courtier, as emperor. Otho knew he needed legitimacy fast. He reinstated Nero's popular reforms, recalled exiled senators, and paid the guards handsomely. He even restored public festivals, reminding the people of happier days. The Senate admired his discipline, the commoners admired his generosity, but admiration alone could not stop an army marching from the north. Otho gathered his generals in a war council. The map of Italy lay across a long table, pins marking the inevitable advance of Vitellius's commanders, Valens and Caecina. The generals debated fiercely. Some urged negotiation, others insisted on immediate confrontation. Otho listened, calm yet determined. He knew the stakes. If Vitellius reached Rome, the bloody chaos of Nero's fall and Galba's assassination would return. The emperor's decision was bold. He would march north personally. Rome gasped. No emperor since Augustus had ridden at the head of an army. But Otho needed to show strength. He needed to convince the legions that he was not simply Nero's elegant friend, not the schemer who bought power, but a commander worthy of their loyalty. His departure from Rome was dramatic. Crowds lined the streets, women shouted blessings, children tossed flowers, and senators bowed deeply. Otho, clad in armor, but still wearing the purple cloak, raised his hand to them. For Rome, he said simply. It was enough. That day he looked like a man chosen by the gods. At first, Otho's commanders enjoyed success. They seized strategic Alpine passes, delayed Vitellius's forces, and even won several skirmishes. Spirits soared. Letters from the front described Otho as calm, generous, and surprisingly brave. Soldiers who once mocked him now saluted with respect. But victories are fragile things. As the armies closed in near Cremona, tensions rose. Caecina, one of Vitellius's generals, attempted diplomacy, more out of ego than peace. He expected Otho to surrender. Otho refused, replying, "Rome will not bow to treason." The refusal enraged Caecina, who marched harder and faster. The two armies finally clashed at the Battle of Bedriacum, the first of many tragedies in a year historians would later call the Year of the Four Emperors. The battle was brutal, chaotic, and devastating. Although Otho's troops fought valiantly, they were exhausted, poorly coordinated, and outnumbered. Night fell upon a field drowned in blood. When dawn rose, Otho learned the truth. His army had broken, and victory had slipped from his hands. The empire now hung by a thread, and that thread was Otho himself.
The morning after Bedriacum was eerily quiet. Messengers delivered casualty reports, each worse than the last. Thousands dead, standards lost, commanders captured or scattered. Otho listened without anger, without bitterness, only with a stillness that frightened even his closest advisors. His generals insisted the war could continue. Reinforcements were on the way. Rome still supported him. His treasury remained full. Fight again, they said. Fight, and victory may yet be ours. But Otho saw what they refused to see. Civil war had already torn Rome apart once. Another battle would rip open wounds the empire might never heal. More sons would die for generals they'd never meet. More mothers would curse the empire that claimed their children. More fields would turn red. And for what? To keep a purple robe? Otho summoned his brother, his loyal freedmen, and the officers who had followed him from Lusitania. He dismissed the rest. When the chamber fell silent, he spoke quietly. "If my death will restore peace to Rome, then Rome shall have it." They begged him to reconsider. They argued, cried, and fell to their knees. But Otho was unmoved. For the first time in his life, his ambition had given way to clarity. He had taken a life to gain the throne, but he would not destroy thousands more to keep it. That night he wrote letters filled not with politics, but gratitude. He thanked his soldiers for their courage. He forgave his enemies. He asked the Senate to protect the empire. His final words in writing were simple and haunting. "Let no more blood be shed for my sake." At dawn he performed a final sacrifice to the gods, then retired to his tent. He took a dagger, the same type Roman generals carried, and struck himself cleanly. There was no struggle, no hesitation. When his soldiers discovered his body, a wail erupted across the camp. Hardened veterans who had mocked him wept openly. Some threw themselves onto their swords beside him, choosing to share the fate of the emperor who had chosen death over civil war. Otho died at 36. Vitellius, hearing the news, reportedly said he was a man who deserved to rule. Even his rival understood the magnitude of his sacrifice. Rome had seen mad emperors, cruel emperors, weak emperors, and corrupt emperors.
But Otho, brief as his rule was, had shown something different: honor. Otho's reign lasted only 3 months, yet historians still debate his place in Roman memory. Was he a schemer who murdered Galba? A decadent noble who rose too high? Or was he the last good man in a year of chaos? In the years that followed, Rome collapsed into deeper civil wars. Vitellius would soon fall to Vespasian. The city would burn again. Legions would slaughter legions. Looking back, many Romans realized something painful. Otho's suicide might have been the empire's last chance at avoiding catastrophe. Contemporaries admired him more after death than during life. Tacitus praised his courage. Plutarch described his final night with reverence. Even soldiers who had supported Vitellius admitted that Otho's sacrifice had shamed them. He had behaved as a true Roman, placing the state above himself. But Otho's story is tragic because it reveals a man divided. His early years were filled with indulgence, vanity, and ruthless ambition. Yet when power finally rested in his hands, he discovered something rare: responsibility. For a brief moment, he transformed into the ruler Rome needed, a ruler willing to risk his life for peace. Modern historians argue that Otho was a man shaped by circumstances. He was not born heroic, he became heroic. And that transformation, in just 90 days, is what sets him apart from Nero, Galba, and Vitellius, all of whom clung to power until the empire dragged them down. Otho chose the opposite. He laid power down willingly. His death had ripple effects across the empire. Veterans told stories of his bravery beside campfires. Senators quoted his final letters. Mothers named their sons Marcus, hoping they might carry a fraction of his courage. In Rome, his statue stood for decades, not as a symbol of victory, but of sacrifice. Perhaps the greatest irony of Otho's life is that he succeeded more in death than in life. His reign did not change laws, conquer lands, or build monuments, but it reminded Romans of virtue, something they feared was lost forever. When later emperors reflected on leadership, some invoked Otho's memory. They spoke of his calm presence in battle, his compassion toward soldiers, his refusal to plunge the empire into further war. Even Vespasian, who eventually restored stability, admitted that Otho's death had paved the way for peace. Today, Otho remains a fascinating figure, an emperor defined not by conquest, but by conscience, a man who rose through ambition, but died through principle. His story echoes through history because it asks a timeless question: is power worth the cost of peace? Otho answered with his life.